I stood in the cold, dimly lit hallway of the lawyer's office, my heart pounding so loud I swore everyone could hear it. My daughter-in-law, Karen, stood across from me, her arms crossed, her lips curled into a smirk that made my stomach twist. She leaned toward her husband, my stepson Brian, whispering something that made him avoid my gaze. The air was thick with tension, like a storm about to break. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd pushed me out of my own family's legacy, my late husband's estate, the one we'd built together over decades. But they didn't know what was coming. Not yet. The lawyer's door creaked open, and Mr. Thompson, a wiry man with glasses too big for his face, gestured us inside. "Mrs. Isabella, please take a seat," he said, his voice clipped. Karen shot me a look, her eyes daring me to step forward. I did, clutching my purse, my knuckles white. This wasn't just about money. It was about everything I'd sacrificed for my family, everything I'd lost. And now, they were trying to erase me. I sat down, my hands trembling, as Karen's voice cut through the silence. "I don't even know why she's here," she said, loud enough for the room to hear. "This is a family matter." The words stung like a slap, but I kept my chin up. I wasn't going to let her see me break. "Hey, before we go any further, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment with your city or country. It's always so cool to see where these stories reach. Now, let's get back to it." The room felt smaller with every second, the walls closing in as Mr. Thompson shuffled papers on his desk. I could feel the weight of their stares, Karen's smugness, Brian's discomfort, and the curious glances from my late husband's cousin, Linda, who'd shown up out of nowhere. This was it. The reading of Robert's will. My Robert, who'd promised me we'd always take care of each other. But now, with him gone, it felt like I was fighting for my place in a family I'd given everything to. Let me take you back a bit to before all this, before the lawyer's office, before the whispers and the betrayal. Robert and I met when I was 32, a single mom scraping by in a small apartment in Charlotte, North Carolina. He was a widower, raising Brian, who was 10 at the time. We fell hard for each other, built a life together. Late nights talking over coffee, saving for our little house, planting a garden we both loved. I raised Brian like my own, even when he pushed me away, calling me Isabella instead of Mom. I didn't mind. I loved him anyway. When Karen came into the picture, things changed. She was charming at first, all smiles when she and Brian got engaged. But after the wedding, the cracks started showing. She'd make little comments, like how the house must be nice to live in rent-free, or how I didn't understand their plans for the future. Robert didn't see it. He adored Karen, thought she was perfect for Brian. But I noticed how she'd linger when we talked about money, how her eyes lit up when Robert mentioned his savings or the family cabin by Lake Norman. Brian was different too. He'd always been quiet, but he started pulling away after marrying Karen. Family dinners became tense, with Karen dominating the conversation, always steering it toward what they deserved. "Brian works so hard," she'd say, glancing at Robert. "He's earned a secure future, don't you think?" I'd nod, bite my tongue, but inside, I felt the sting. I'd been the one at Robert's side through his long illness, managing his medications, driving him to appointments, holding his hand when the pain got bad. Karen and Brian? They'd visit once a month, maybe, always with an excuse for why they couldn't stay long. Then there was Linda, Robert's cousin, who'd pop in every few years when she needed something. She'd call Robert Bobby and reminisce about their childhood, but I knew she was just fishing for a handout. Robert, bless his heart, was too kind to say no. I'd watch her leave with a check or a promise, my stomach churning. She hadn't been there for him, not like I had. When Robert got sicker, the tension grew. Karen started dropping hints about securing the family's future, always with that same smile. Brian would nod along, avoiding my eyes. I'd overhear them talking in hushed tones about the will, about what was fair. Fair? I'd given up my job to care for Robert full-time. I'd put our savings into his treatments, sold my own car to cover bills. But to them, I was just the stepmom, the outsider who didn't belong. One night, a month before Robert passed, I found him in his study, staring at a stack of papers. "Isabella," he said, his voice weak but firm. I'm making sure you're taken care of, no matter what. I hugged him, tears in my eyes, but I didn't ask questions. I trusted him. I always had. Looking back, I should have seen the signs. Karen's late-night calls to Robert, her concern about his estate, Brian's sudden interest in the cabin, asking if it was still in Dad's name. Linda showing up unannounced, all teary-eyed and nostalgic. They were circling, waiting for their chance. And when Robert died, that chance came. The day of Robert's funeral was gray and heavy, the kind of day where the clouds seemed to press down on you. The church in Charlotte was packed. Neighbors, old co-workers, distant relatives who hadn't seen Robert in years. I sat in the front pew, my hands folded tightly in my lap, trying to focus on the pastor's words. But all I could feel were the eyes on me, the whispers rippling through the crowd like a cold breeze. Karen and Brian sat one row back, her arm looped through his, her face a perfect mask of grief. She dabbed her eyes with a tissue, but I caught her glancing around, sizing up who was there. Brian kept his head down, his jaw tight. I wanted to believe he was hurting, that he missed his dad, but the distance between us felt like a canyon now. Linda was there too, in a black dress that looked brand new, her sobs loud enough to draw attention. "Oh, Bobby!" she wailed during the eulogy, clutching a handkerchief. People turned to look, some nodding sympathetically. I bit my lip, hard. She hadn't called him in months, not even when he was in hospice. But now she was here, playing the grieving cousin for all it was worth. After the service, at the reception in the church hall, the tension thickened. I was pouring coffee when Karen sidled up, her voice syrupy sweet. "Isabella, you holding up okay?" she asked, tilting her head. Before I could answer, she added, "It's just so hard, you know. Brian's taking it rough. He was so close to his dad." The words landed like a jab, implying I hadn't been. I forced a smile, my throat tight. "We're all hurting," I said softly, but she was already turning away, her heels clicking on the floor. Later, I overheard her talking to Linda by the dessert table. "It's only fair Brian gets the house," Karen said, her voice low but sharp. "He's Robert's son, after all." Linda nodded, her eyes glinting. "Oh, absolutely. Blood's thicker than water, right?" I froze, my hand trembling around my coffee cup. They didn't see me standing there, hidden by a cluster of mourners, but their words cut deep. I wasn't just Robert's wife to them. I was nothing. Then came the moment I'll never forget. As I was leaving the hall, Karen caught my arm, her grip just a little too tight. "You don't need to come to the will reading, Isabella," she said, her smile cold. "It's really just for immediate family." Immediate family. The words burned. I pulled my arm free, looked her square in the eyes, and said, "I'll be there, Karen." Her smile faltered just for a second before she turned away. The next few days were a blur of grief and paperwork. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't stop replaying Karen's words. But something else was nagging at me, something I couldn't quite place. It started at the funeral, when Mr. Thompson, the lawyer, had pulled me aside briefly. He'd looked nervous, his glasses slipping down his nose as he mumbled, "Mrs. Isabella, we'll sort everything out soon. Just be patient." His tone was odd, like he was holding something back. I brushed it off at the time, too overwhelmed to think straight, but it stuck with me. Then there was Mrs. Carter, our neighbor, who'd known Robert since he was a kid. She'd come by with a casserole a day after the funeral, her eyes soft with sympathy. As she handed me the dish, she hesitated, then said, "You know, Isabella, Robert was so proud of you. He told me once he'd made sure you'd never have to worry." Her words were kind, but they felt like a puzzle piece that didn't fit. Why would she bring that up now? The real clue came the morning of the will reading. I was sorting through Robert's desk, looking for his insurance papers, when I found a small folded note tucked inside an old book of poetry he loved. It was in his handwriting, shaky but clear. "Isabella, my heart, you're my rock. The cabin is yours. Always." My breath caught. The cabin by Lake Norman was our special place, where we'd spent summers fishing and laughing. Robert had promised it would be mine one day, but Karen had been so vocal about wanting it. Had he written this to remind me? Or was it something more? I tucked the note into my pocket, my mind racing. Robert had always been careful, deliberate. He wouldn't have left something like that by accident. But why hadn't he told me more? And why was Mr. Thompson acting so cagey? I didn't have answers, but as I drove to the lawyer's office that afternoon, I felt a spark of hope and a growing sense that something was about to unravel. When I walked into the office, Karen's face soured instantly. "I thought we agreed this was private," she said, her voice dripping with irritation. Brian shifted in his seat, saying nothing. Linda, sitting in the corner, raised an eyebrow but stayed quiet. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "Everyone's here who needs to be," he said, his tone firm but nervous. I sat down, the note burning a hole in my pocket. Whatever was coming, I was ready, or at least I told myself I was. As I sat in that sterile lawyer's office waiting for Mr. Thompson to start, my mind drifted back to the years that had led me here. I could still see Robert's smile, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, sitting on the porch of our Lake Norman cabin. Those memories weren't just happy. They were proof of everything we'd built together, everything I'd poured into this family. But they also reminded me of the moments when I felt like an outsider, even in my own home. I remembered one Christmas years ago when Brian was still in college. Karen had just started dating him and she'd joined us for dinner. I'd spent days cooking, Robert's favorite roast, homemade pies, the works. But Karen barely touched her plate, pushing the food around while talking about her big plans for a new condo. "Brian and I deserve a fresh start," she'd said, her eyes flicking to Robert. "You know, somewhere we can build our own memories." I caught the hint. She was already eyeing what she thought was hers. Brian just nodded along, and I felt a pang in my chest. I'd raised him, helped with his homework, cheered at his games, but that night, I felt like a guest at my own table. Then there was the time Robert got his diagnosis. Stage 4 cancer, the kind that steals your breath just hearing it. I took a leave from my job at the library, cashed out my savings to cover his treatments. Brian and Karen were too busy to visit often. Work, they said, or some vague excuse. But I was there every day, holding Robert's hand through chemo, reading to him when he couldn't sleep. One night, he squeezed my hand and whispered, "You're my everything, Isabella. Don't let anyone tell you different." I thought he meant it emotionally, but now, sitting in that office, I wondered if he'd been trying to tell me something else. Linda's visits were another sore spot. She'd show up unannounced, always with a sob story, car trouble, a bad breakup, you name it. Robert would write her a check, and I'd bite my tongue. Once, after she left, I found him in his study looking tired. "Why do you keep helping her?" I asked. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "She's family, Isabella. But you're my priority. Always will be." I believed him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Linda saw me as competition, someone standing between her and Robert's wallet. Those moments piled up over the years. Karen's subtle digs, Brian's growing distance, Linda's opportunistic tears. They made me feel like I had to prove my place in Robert's life, even though I'd been his partner, his rock, for over 20 years. Now, with him gone, it felt like they were trying to erase me entirely. The air in Mr. Thompson's office was so thick I could hardly breathe. We were all there. Me, Karen, Brian, Linda, and a couple of distant cousins who'd shown up hoping for a handout. The lawyer's desk was cluttered with papers, and he fumbled with them, his hands shaky. Karen sat up straight, her hands folded neatly, but her eyes were sharp, like a hawk waiting to swoop. Brian stared at the floor, his shoulders hunched. Linda kept adjusting her scarf, her lips pursed like she was holding back a smile. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat. "Let's begin," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "This is the last will and testament of Robert James Carter, dated June 12, 2024. My heart thudded. That was just a month before he passed. I clutched the note in my pocket, the one about the cabin, willing myself to stay calm. He started reading, his voice monotone but heavy with weight. "To my son, Brian Carter, I leave my collection of antique watches and $50,000 from my savings." Brian's head snapped up, and Karen's smile widened, her hand squeezing his arm. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. That was a lot, but it wasn't everything, not even close. To my cousin Linda Harris, I leave $10,000 to help with her expenses. Linda let out a small gasp, her hand flying to her chest like she was shocked. I almost rolled my eyes. She'd expected more, I could tell. Then Mr. Thompson paused, his eyes flicking to me. The room went still, and I felt Karen's stare burning into me. "To my beloved wife, Isabella Carter," he began, and my heart stopped. Karen leaned forward, her jaw tight. "I leave the sum of $5,000 and my personal library." The words hit like a punch. $5,000? His books? That was it? Karen's lips curled into a triumphant smirk, and Brian let out a small breath, like he was relieved. Linda glanced at me, her pity so fake it made my skin crawl. I sat frozen, my hands trembling in my lap. This couldn't be right. Robert had promised me, promised we'd be okay. The cabin, the house, our life together. Was this all I was worth to him? The room was silent, the kind of silence that feels like it's screaming. Karen leaned back in her chair, her victory practically glowing. "Well," she said softly, "that seems fair." Her voice dripped with satisfaction, and I wanted to scream, to demand answers. But I couldn't move, couldn't speak. It felt like the ground had vanished beneath me. Mr. Thompson adjusted his glasses, his expression unreadable. "There's one more clause," he said, his voice quieter now. Every head turned. Karen's smile faltered, just for a moment. I held my breath, the note in my pocket feeling heavier than ever. Mr. Thompson's words hung in the air like a thunderclap waiting to strike. "One more clause," he repeated, his fingers brushing the edge of a sealed envelope on his desk. The room, already thick with tension, seemed to tighten further. Karen's smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of unease. Brian's eyes darted to her, then to me, his face pale. Linda leaned forward, her scarf slipping as she gripped the armrests of her chair. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat, the note in my pocket. "The cabin is yours. Always." Burning like a promise I wasn't sure I could trust. Mr. Thompson opened the envelope, pulling out a single sheet of paper. "This is an addendum to the will, signed by Robert Carter and notarized 2 weeks before his passing," he said, his voice steady now, almost deliberate. He glanced at me just for a second, and I saw something in his eyes, resolve, maybe even a hint of satisfaction. It reads as follows: "To my wife Isabella Carter, I leave the entirety of my estate, including the family home in Charlotte, the cabin by Lake Norman, and all remaining financial assets, to be managed at her discretion. This is my final wish, to honor the woman who stood by me through every moment of our life together." The room exploded into silence, the kind that's louder than any scream. Karen's face went white, her mouth half open like she'd been slapped. Brian's head snapped toward her, his eyes wide with shock. Linda let out a strangled gasp, her hand clutching her chest like she was about to faint. I sat there, frozen, my breath caught somewhere between relief and disbelief. The cabin, the house, everything. Robert hadn't forgotten me. He'd kept his promise. Karen found her voice first, her words sharp and brittle. "That's impossible!" she spat, standing up so fast her chair scraped the floor. "There's no way Robert would do this. He told us the cabin was for Brian." Her voice cracked, and she turned to Mr. Thompson, her finger jabbing the air. "This is a mistake. You've got it wrong." Mr. Thompson didn't flinch. He pushed his glasses up and held up the paper. "This addendum is legally binding, Mrs. Carter," he said, his tone calm but firm. "It was signed in my presence with 2 witnesses and notarized. Robert was very clear about his intentions." He paused, looking directly at Karen. "He also left a letter explaining his decision, if you'd like me to read it." Karen's eyes narrowed, but she sank back into her chair, her hands trembling. Brian reached for her arm, but she yanked it away, her face a mix of fury and humiliation. I didn't dare look at her. My eyes were locked on Mr. Thompson, my heart still racing. A letter? Robert had left a letter? He pulled out another sheet, this one in Robert's familiar, shaky handwriting. "Dear family," he began, his voice softening as he read. "If you're hearing this, I'm gone, and I hope you'll honor my wishes. Isabella has been my rock, my partner, my everything. She gave up her life to care for me, and I trust her to carry on our legacy. To Brian, I love you, son, but your future is secure. To Linda, I wish you well, but my heart lies with the woman who never left my side. Please respect this." The room was deathly quiet. Karen's face was a mask of rage, her lips pressed into a thin line. Brian stared at the floor, his hands clenched into fists. Linda's fake tears were gone, replaced by a scowl she didn't bother to hide. I felt tears prick my eyes, not from sadness, but from a flood of relief. Robert had seen me. He'd known what I'd given, what I'd endured, and he'd made sure I wasn't erased. The meeting ended in a blur. Karen stormed out, muttering something about lawyers and contesting, but Mr. Thompson's calm assurance that the will was ironclad seemed to deflate her. Brian followed her, his shoulders slumped, not once meeting my eyes. Linda lingered, throwing me a look that was equal parts envy and defeat before slinking out. The distant cousins mumbled their goodbyes, clearly disappointed their names hadn't come up. And then it was just me and Mr. Thompson, the weight of the moment settling around us. "Thank you," I said quietly, my voice shaking. He nodded, a small smile breaking through his usual stiffness. "Robert was a good man," he said. "He wanted to make sure you were okay." I clutched the note in my pocket, the one I hadn't needed to show after all. Robert had taken care of everything. In the weeks that followed, I moved forward with a quiet strength I hadn't known I had. The house was mine, the cabin too, and the savings, enough to keep me secure, just like Robert promised. Karen and Brian didn't call, didn't visit. I heard through a neighbor they were looking at condos in Raleigh, starting fresh, just like Karen always wanted. Linda sent me a curt email asking for a small loan, which I ignored. I didn't need to prove anything to them anymore. Looking back, I realized this wasn't just about money or property. It was about loyalty, about love, about standing up for what's right even when the world tries to push you out. Robert saw me, even when others didn't, and that was worth more than any inheritance. Hey, if this story hit you in the feels, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments. What would you have done in my shoes? Have you ever faced a family fight like this? Drop your thoughts below, and let's keep the conversation going. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.